Board member and Finance and Operations
just
Committee member.
turn on their mic for a second and say their name. That would be great. The board
Chris
members can go
Kosinski.
first.
Hi, sorry. Chris Kosinski is on.
Here, here. Beth Hassler, if you didn't hear me, sorry. I had microphone issues.
Dave Moyer.
This is David
Courtney
Lau.
Troutman. Courtney Troutman.
Gordon Snyder.
Rob Martinelli.
Craig Sipka.
Leanne Meyer-Smith.
Terry Fielden, ICI.
Dave Smith.
Chris Weldon.
And we have Adrian with us as well, who is taking notes for us. Is that everybody? Great, thank you. First thing on the agenda is public comments, and I have one. And I'm just going to read it. It says, "Good day, everyone. I am Gail Renault, a member of the Elmhurst Cool Cities Coalition, and live at 345 Webster in Elmhurst, Illinois. Last year, I presented an example of zero net energy school, Discovery Elementary in Virginia, which has achieved ZNE, zero net energy, US GBC certification, and was built at a cost comparable to US GBC LEED Silver. More schools are being built to zero net energy guidelines throughout the United States, with the cost differential being 0 to 7% increase as compared to standard construction costs. If we assume the construction cost for the school design is $25 million, then the differential between LEED Silver and ZNE is about $1.5 million, which is about a 6% increase. This is within the experiences that the New Building Institute and the USGBC are seeing in the marketplace. The incremental costs that occur for these types of upgrades are in building envelope and renewable energy generation. In the number presented to you, in this case, however, I might reconsider the additional $300,000 cost for enhanced heating, air conditioning, and ventilation system. In this ZNE design, the size of the mechanical system should be smaller, with the overall cost of mechanical systems being neutral. Also, there is an opportunity to obtain the Illinois Clean Energy Foundation grant to offset some or all of the increase. Other items to consider: the ZNE school should have lower ongoing operational and maintenance costs. The best time to incorporate efficiency is when building a school. The next best time to perform energy efficiency retrofit is when the mechanical systems are being replaced. In addition to being cost effective, the new school designs will provide an excellent environment for student learning and a backdrop for incorporating STEM education. Thank you." Now, that's the only public comment that I have. So I will move on to approval of the minutes from our April 7th, 2020 meeting. Are there any changes that any of the members would like to propose?
No.
Hearing none, then those minutes will stand as presented. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Welton to go through the remaining items on the agenda.
First up, we have Terry Fielden to talk about the Group 1 projects. So, David, could you put up the Group 1 projects?
Just a word of caution, my wife just got home, so my dog may chime in to help me. Okay. Is this a PDF, Dave?
Is this going to be as big as it gets, David?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right, so I'm briefly going to go through a project update based on Group 1. So this is a format that I've developed in various districts. We'll just kind of go through it, give you a little pictorial update to help everybody. So go on to the next slide. So the first project we'll talk about is Edison. And this is a full floor plan of Edison. Just a reminder that everything basically to the south of the red line that I'm showing there is a new addition. And everything to the north is the existing building. We are touching virtually the entire existing building, and we're putting a new addition on. Go on to the next slide. So this is a picture of the site. This is where the existing main office is now. I just want to show you, we do have it well posted and a lot of signs up there for safety and so forth. And you'll notice that we are calling attention to COVID-19 as we go through the summer. Here's the foundations that are going in. These have started. We'll have some of these walls casted already, but we are beginning to put the addition in place. Next slide. So this is a reminder that for the fall year, we're going to have these two highlighted yellow areas renovated and ready for use. And the smaller circle to the left in the upper left-hand corner there, that's where the temporary library is going to be for this year. And then the larger oval, more in the center of the page, is a new admin office area. So we're renovating the existing library right now to make it the new admin office area. Next slide. So this is some of the work that's starting to happen inside the new admin area. We've got most of the area demolished already, and we're starting to put back up some metal stud framing. Next slide, please. This is the future temp library. All that area has been cleared out, and we're beginning to start restoring that area. Next slide. And this is the giant underground water vault. And so this is a pretty big area. We're expecting that vault within the next 4 or 5 days, but what you're seeing right there is the concrete pad. So this is a pretty significant size water vault that's going to go in there. And if you want to see it before we get it covered up, now will be the time to go. So, but we are making good progress with that. It's an important feature. It's an important part of the job because the parking lot sits on top of this vault. So we have to get the vault in place in order to get the parking lot back for the start of the school. Next slide, please. We'll move on to Brian. And just a reminder at Brian in the lower left-hand corner there, we're putting a 2-classroom addition, and then in the center is the new entry and admin space. Next slide. So this is kind of where we're at the admin space right now. We've removed the existing canopy, and we're beginning to cut in foundations. And actually, the foundations have been cut in. Probably had a little difficulty with the rain at this point, but we should be casting footings now. Next slide, please. And this is the classroom addition. You can see the masonry walls are up. We'll be setting steel on that here shortly, and then beginning an interior work. Next slide. And this is interior classroom renovation. Nothing too dramatic here. This is inside the existing building, but we're preparing to do some of the mechanical renovations that are required. Next slide, please. So at Fisher, and just a reminder, at Fisher, we're putting a small addition on the building, and we're remodeling the existing office space. Next slide, please. So the addition is up, the foundations are in, and we have some of the masonry in place. Next slide. So at Jackson, again, this is a new entry and office renovations. And it's depicted here. Next slide. This is kind of where we're at. We have Fisher had an existing canopy overhang. So we put a foundation wall underneath the existing canopy. And this is the wall that's run up underneath it to enclose that area. And we did that for cost efficiency purposes. So now we're beginning to work on the inside of the space. Next slide. We also have a classroom renovation for LRC. We're converting the LRC into 2 classrooms. Next slide. So this is where we're at right now. Obviously, we just tore everything out. We're beginning to restore that area here in the next coming weeks. Demolition in the area has gone okay. I went through the space, looks pretty clean. Nothing out of the ordinary. Next slide, please. Sandberg School. Again, we have an interior renovation, and we also have a new ADA accessibility ramp at the school that we're putting in. Next slide. Next slide. This is again a picture of the secureness of the area. And I chose Sandberg because Sandberg's in a more publicly accessed area. There's a major sidewalk where people can walk down there on St. Charles. So I just want to show you that everything's secure. Next slide. Here's a pretty picture of the interior renovation. We removed the vault and so forth, and we're beginning mechanical work and so forth and starting to restore the area. Next slide. Emerson School, and Emerson is the last one. Emerson is a parking lot replacement and drainage upgrades, and we've just started that work now, so really nothing to show you at this point. I think the next slide, you can go to the next slide, just shows you what Emerson looks like currently, but soon it will be much improved. And next slide. And there you are. Any questions?
This is Chris. I had a couple questions just on the impact of COVID and the economic disruption, stay-at-home orders, et cetera, on the projects. I know that we've obviously been able to continue all of that work despite the restrictions in place, but has it caused any challenges or delays? Would be question one. And question two would be, has it affected the costs at all? You know, are we having to spend additional dollars to put procedures in place and the like? And then lastly, third question is just the timelines. I recall being fairly tight to get the work done before school starts in the fall, and wanted to check back in with you to make sure that we're not expecting any disruptions there.
So,
thank you.
Okay. So we haven't seen any real impacts yet from COVID-19. We've got some preliminary indication that we have some mechanical rooftop units that are coming out of Mexico, and they're indicating to us there's a slight delay to the delivery. We were expecting them in May. Now they're indicating that they're coming roughly in mid-June, but we don't expect that to be a real delay to the project because we should have time to recover for that. That's the only identifiable material issue that's come to our attention at this point. As far as additional costs go, nobody's made any comments on additional costs. You might see if something gets, sometimes you see something for extra PPE, personal protective equipment, depending on a sequence or something that we have to do, but nothing anticipated, at least in the near-term future. And timelines, we're still on track at the moment. That could change. We haven't had a COVID incident yet on the job, but if there's an infection or something that shows up, that could force us to take a pause for a couple days, clean the site appropriately, and then restart operations. But so far, we've been fortunate in that nobody has come to work infected.
Okay, great to hear.
Hey, Terry, sorry, Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, no, I just had one more on this line, and then I'll kind of yield. But remind me how much cushion we had in these timetables. Was it a couple weeks in terms of what we needed to wrap up for the summer versus when school starts?
It's about a week is what we had figured for this first phase. The first phase includes a lot of fire protection lines in the existing classroom and ceiling restoration. So.
Okay, and that's across the board a week, or is that just the tightest one is a week, but some of the buildings are long?
The tightest one would be Edison at this point. Still, it would remain as Edison.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Go ahead, Rob.
Just a couple questions. Contingency health, as you sit today, you opening up skeletons and old buildings that haven't been opened up in a while. Current contingency health is looking good. I mean, it's early, so it should look good, right?
Yeah. Well, now you think if it was going to look bad, it would look bad now, right? Hopefully,
right.
Right. So we found some, obviously, what you would expect, some asbestos issues and so forth that we had. And it's in the vault at Sandburg is one example. There was some asbestos tile that was hidden. So we're taking care of that. But nothing really I would call major impact at this point.
Okay, so nothing, we open this up, we expect the mechanical be here, it's not here, and now we've got to go find it, right? Nothing of drastic that you wouldn't see on a day-to-day summer renovation project.
Nothing out of the ordinary.
And then, the only other thing just we look at is as you ramp up your manpower or your tradespersons, once you get, you really start stacking trades, you may want to consider having an additional cleaning person at high traffic areas. It seems to help in a couple instances where and right now you're not stacking people on top of each other yet, but you might get there. So that would be my only other comment based on, knock on wood. I mean, to me, it's a not when, if you will have, it's more of a when, right? We had another incident today on a job where we literally shut it down, clean the place out, right? You spend 10 grand cleaning. So it's not a fun practice.
Oh, we've had exposure on other sites, secondhand exposure, not directly on the job site. And there's a difference between secondhand and exposure on the site. So with the secondhand exposure, the district did have a sprayer available, and we immediately sprayed the building. And the other thing that we do, of course, in this case, I'll just use a real example. It was a case where we were moving furniture. So because the person who had a secondhand exposure was moving furniture, we just close that area off, and we're going to leave it sit for a period of weeks before we go back in and clean it so that the virus dies off.
So better safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry. So we're just taking precautions like that along those lines. But they are, you're correct. They're addressed as they come up. Each situation is going to be a little bit unique. And we are really pushing that people wear masks inside the building. Because the underlying evidence seems to be that sneezing and coughing is the way the virus is transmitted. So we want to reduce that as much as possible.
It's not too terrible now. Wait till it's July 1st and it's 90 degrees, right?
Yeah. Yes. Well, you have to lead by example, right? So if I show up on a job site, I'll have my mask on as well. So
yeah. Okay. No, I appreciate the update.
You're welcome.
Terry, what's the anticipated start for the Emerson parking lot work?
It should be in the next week or so. They should have been doing some tree clearing at this point, and then we'll start with demolition.
Yeah, the tree removals, that's already, I think, happened already.
Yeah, we had some comments on that as well. So, yeah.
Comments, what a nice way to put it.
Yes. Constructive comments, I'd call it.
For the record, you're also starting this is last year you started in the worst May possible, and this year you've started in the worst year possible. So congratulations, Terry.
Well, thank you very much. I'm a big fan of parking lots in rain. There's nothing says challenge like RAIN.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have we spent any additional contingency funds to date on those projects?
Not yet. I would expect that Emerson will run into some unforeseen soil conditions and so forth, but we'll see what happens there. Okay. And we keep Todd apprised of the costs and so forth. We're not waiting on that. So.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like you all are doing a good job managing a pretty complex time that we're all living in. So thank you for the work. I think it looks like good progress so far. And my only concern is the timeline at Edison in particular, because I feel like things there could happen that are totally out of your control or anyone's control that would cause a problem. So I think it is probably worth coming up with, if we have some dangling pieces that aren't done yet, what are we going to do? Right. And having a plan for that we can vet in advance just in case.
And we will be looking at that in the coming month or so. See, we should, Chris, we look at that all the time. So and we try to do the best we can as far as that goes. So we'll be focused on that. And if there is a problem, we're going to come back to you and let you know.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on the Group 1 projects with Terry Fielden? All right, thank you, Terry. That was a really, really nice update. I like to see the progress on the projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Next up, we're going to have Craig Siepka talk about the Group 2 projects planning. So, Craig, are you ready?
We're ready, but I think Leanne's going to start us off for the first couple slides.
We are ready. So David, if you could put up the PowerPoint or the presentation.
Looks like it's going to take a minute to load. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, this is a big one.
Yeah. So we'll start in just a little bit here. But the first slide is just the title sheet, so we can go past that. We're very excited. We've been working hard on the Group 2 projects. So we're going to run through a little bit about Lincoln Field, and then you'll hear about the Emerson Media Center and some renovations there as well. It's only a couple hundred slides, so we won't take all night.
I should have upgraded my Wi-Fi first.
I know sometimes the big graphics take up a lot of space. Even when we reduce them, they're still significant. All right, so you can forward through the first slide, the title slide. And this one is just showing the district between Group 1 and Group 2. We're throughout the entire district. So you can move on to the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to talk about Lincoln Field, Emerson, and then we also have a brief update on some projects at York High School. Lincoln and Field, Craig is going to take you through a lot of the exterior concepts that we've been developing. We submitted schematic design, which is a pretty big milestone in the planning, to ICI this week, and they're working on a budget estimate. For Emerson on the interior renovations, we've met with the staff. We're working through some concepts there that we'll share with you. Sentinel Technology has been engaged to work on the cabling, the MDF and IDF rooms. The schematic design package for Emerson is due June 5th, and we're tracking well to be able to get that to ICI. York High School, we're working on replacing some of the mechanical units there and rebuilding the track. Right now on those projects, we're underway. Next week, our mechanical group is looking to meet with Todd and just kind of go over some of the mechanical aspects and selections there. Schematic design for those projects is also due June 5th, and we're tracking well to get those to ICI as well. So Craig is going to lead us off with the Lincoln and Field concepts.
All right. Thanks, Leanne.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Nice seeing you all again. Just have a few brief slides. We're going to go from Lincoln to Field and then wrap it up with Emerson. But as we start things off over here, I thought I'd go ahead and throw up on the screen just to remind everybody where we left off with a footprint over at Lincoln. The relation to all the site elements. And so you can see the school primarily in the center of the site, parking on the south end, and then the play fields and playground equipment on right off of Montrose on the north side. What we're going to do is we're going to show you a couple of renderings that we are in the process right now of designing and looking at the exterior. As Leanne mentioned, ICI is also taking these drawings and they are looking at the budget. So there's going to be a lot of going back and forth in the next few weeks between our team and ICI's team to really refine the design, make sure everything is in line. We stay within the budget parameters, look for savings along the way as well. Long story short, it's an iterative process, and we want to make sure that we do right by all the parameters that are set for us. So let's go to the next slide. What we'll be looking at over here is the latest iteration of the Lincoln entrance. And for those folks that are on the committee here that we've had a chance to briefly speak with over the last week and a half, you can see a little bit of a change over here, and it'll become a little even more apparent when we look at the next rendering. But really, this is the next iteration, taking all the comments that we have received to date, the pros and the cons, and trying to give a little bit of articulation and to some of those ideas. Sticking with the flat roof concept is where we are what we're looking at right now, and what ICI is pricing, with a combination of punched openings and some window walls on the second floor. You can see the slight canopy in the front over here. And again, that is to allow us to have a little bit more articulation to the front entrance, call attention to the fact that this is where you enter the school, but certainly not being overbearing and kind of overwhelming in the site and the size that we're dealing with over here. So that's the front entrance along help me out, Leanne. Fairfield. Thank you. I'm sorry, everyone.
Yep.
Let's go to the next slide, Dave. And this is what you would see if you were standing on the corner of Montrose and Hillside, kind of looking in the southwest direction. This gives you an idea of the classroom neighborhoods that we spoke about when we talked about the floor plan. And again, a combination of face brick, some glass, and some phenolic panels on the second floor. But again, keeping with the flat roof scheme that we heard people commenting on, and a combination of bigger expanses of windows on the second floor with the punched openings on the lower level. And again, not necessarily on the first level. We're taking the opportunity of not making those windows necessarily in any kind of rhythm, but trying to look at different sizes and shapes based on the kid size. And then even maybe using just a slight use of color on that first floor to remind everybody that this is a school for kids. We can go to the next one, Dave. All right, moving on over to Field. Again, similar to what we were talking about over at Lincoln. This is where we're landing with the footprint on the site over at Field, and with the building a little bit closer oriented on the north side of the site, parking and the play fields on the south end. And then certainly one of the bigger attributes of this site is to really kind of announce the district and sort of act as that gateway, if you will, to the district and to Elmhurst as a whole along North Avenue. Next slide. This is a view driving northbound on Emroy, looking at the front entrance of Field Elementary School. So you see pretty similar in terms of the materials that we're proposing for Lincoln, but done in just a slightly different way, a little bit more modern concept, with the flagpole and the sort of the plaza in the front over there, flanked on either side by the main entrance, and then that bigger expanse of glass and the canopy over there really provides some shelter and some shade relief for the plaza that is underneath that canopy, and really gives a nice kind of view, if you will, to some of the more prominent spaces in the design. If we go around to the next view, this is what you would see if you're looking on Emroy, looking south, basically right off of North Avenue. So these are the classroom neighborhoods that we are articulating over here. And again, bigger expanses of glass on the second floor, smaller punched openings on the first floor. And then you can see right in front something that we're still experimenting with and looking at from a design standpoint, the enclosure for the playground that is in this area. So Right now, we're showing it as a masonry wall, probably about a 3-foot wall, but we're looking and investigating and certainly going back and forth with our friends at ICI in terms of the best articulation and the best configuration of that gate in terms of the budget, as well as from security purposes. But this gives you a really good view of what you're going to be seeing off of that corner of Emroy and North Avenue. What you see in the foreground is the pedestrian walkway. That's kind of going nowhere. Right behind it, then a bit of grass, and again the playground, which is sandwiched between that wall and the rest of the building. So really kind of a nice view, beacon for the district, and I think going to have quite a stunning presence off of North Avenue. Let's go to the next slide. This particular, we're going to head over to Emerson right now. This particular slide is a slide many of you that have been following and involved in the referendum will remember that we used to help explain and understand the different types of work, that categories of work that would happen at Emerson, as well as some of the other elementary schools. We had those 3 buckets, if you remember: the maintenance, the building specific items, and then the future ready items. Well, as you heard Terry talk about at the beginning of the evening, we've done some work, or in the process of doing work, paving, drainage, and so forth. So we kind of mark those off. We are going to be taking a look in the second group of work at the gym RTU replacement, and then start thinking about a light touch with maybe some finish upgrades for the multi-purpose room and some security cameras. And then the last category under future ready, where we want to spend just a couple more minutes after this slide and talk a little bit about the media center renovation, which includes maker spaces, breakout spaces or small group rooms, as well as some technology upgrades. So let's go to the next slide just to get ourselves a little oriented. About 2 weeks ago, Leanne and I had the opportunity of speaking with your principal over there in the course of those conversations. We've been able to identify kind of the parts and pieces, if you will, that will go into making that will go into the library design. And if you remember, these are some of the same components that we discussed and presented and articulated in the Edison design last year, resurrecting those and giving those a little bit more articulation and meaning. Those are those first 5 items that you see over here: the help desk, the zone, the media center, the kind of zoning it in a certain way, collaboration opportunities, and by that we mean small group rooms. Of course, you can't get anywhere without doing some storage, especially when you talk about the kinds of equipment and materials that are present in the library. And then, of course, doing an abundant amount of display would be important, both for displaying books as well as student projects and the like. On top of all of that, there were 3 things that the principal asked us to keep in mind in any kind of design that we moved forward with over at her building, and that would be to understand that we need to maximize as best we can the existing square footage. Things are a little tight over there from her perspective, and we're going to be looking at doing that in a variety of different ways. The idea of increasing flexibility between her spaces, and then transparency, and all those kind of work together really to create a whole, I guess, if you will, serve as the backdrop for the improvements that we're going to be recommending and moving forward with. So let's go to the next slide. This just gives you an idea of how the footprint sits on the site, and then within that black circle over there, item number 2, that's where the library is located, pretty prominently in the center of the building, with some incredible views to the wooded area to the south. Just really a gorgeous opportunity over here. And let's go to the next slide, Dave. This is a blow up of that same area. You'll notice that hexagon shape in the center at the bottom of the screen over there, the center bottom. That is a recessed area that is sort of like an amphitheater type setting within the library. That is one of the challenges, I think, that the principal identified for us in terms of flexibility and redesigning the space. So We're going to be looking at that very closely. And then you'll notice within the library, lots of little rooms kind of lining the perimeter and so forth. Restricting the space, I guess, if you will, the use of the space, and really confining how students and staff move through that room. So next slide. We took the opportunity of kind of wiping the slate clean, if you will. You notice that hexagon is gone. So maybe one of our thoughts here is to infill that, increase maybe a little bit more functionality and safety of the students and kids. You'll notice we've also eliminated the wall between the library and the hallway. So here you go. We're starting to look at ways to maximize square footage and give a little bit more breathing room to everybody using the building. And then this next slide, Dave, is a diagram that we're hoping to convey some of the ideas and thoughts, the elements that go into the library, and certainly the priorities that the principal has given us. So those things that you see in blue are a combination of built-in seating components, as potential seating components, as well as small group rooms. You'll see the help desk sort of centered in the middle of the space with adequate views for supervision and access to and from students. And then those boxes kind of around there really represent places where books could go, and also where some larger group instruction could be had. Lining the perimeters, combination of storage and display, which are important elements in any library. But you'll notice in this particular instance, some of that happens out in the hallway, or what is now the hallway, across the hallway from where the library entrance is. And that's the opportunity that we're going to take to expand quote unquote the square footage, if you will, and make use of the hallway space. Something, if you remember, that we discussed and took the opportunity of addressing over at Edison, and certainly things that we're looking at over at Bryan right now. So lastly, this last slide is just a compilation of different examples, opportunities where we've been able to renovate some libraries and really start thinking about some of these architectural design elements that can make up the whole of the library. Of course, your situation, your school, every single one of your schools is unique and will be unique in terms of the solution that we provide. But this gives you a good idea of maybe the level of quality and finish that you could expect moving forward for not only Emerson, but all of your library projects at each one of your elementary schools. So at this point, I'll stop, and I think take whatever questions that anybody might have. Anyone?
Jim, this is Karen. I have a question about Lincoln and a question at Field.
Okay.
So I think it's slides 4 and 6 are probably the best pictures to illustrate what I'm looking at. And I think it's Villette is the South Street, where you have neighborhood classrooms. I forgot what you called it, Craig.
Do you want me to move to the slide? I just need to know which one that is. But
4 and 6.
But they're not numbered. I can't see.
Go one more back, or 2 more. One more now. There you go.
Okay, that one. So I'm suggesting, I thought of this after you last showed us, and this picture actually illustrates it best. I like the new design, by the way. I have all kinds of questions about how you got to that versus the whatever, the house roof lines, whatever. Yeah. I like this. But I'm suggesting that we have it fill it in. I would think 1, it's less expensive, but 2, what I'm seeing is I'm still concerned about us not. I'm seeing an opportunity here for us to make sure that we have additional interior space in case we need it for classrooms. I'm concerned, and I see a possibility for us here. It's very clear in my mind, and visually. And so I really think that we need to do that, because there's more and more homes that are tear downs, families in the Lincoln area. It would, when we had Jackson overflowing, At one point, there are kids in the Jackson schools that went to Lincoln, because we needed the space. So we have a lot more flexibility. And so I think that we need to include that from a planning standpoint with increased enrollment, which we have significantly than other districts. And I just see it continuing, and I see the opportunity. So that was the first thing. You want me to stop and then I'll go to field? Or
Well, how about if I address that question before we go to field?
Yep.
And with regards to the plan, if you remember, we did include two additional spaces. One of them is a community room, and another, well, basically both of them are community rooms that could be used by students and staff. And it will serve as student population growth as the need arises in the future. So I'm glad you mentioned that. It's good to point out. It's not necessarily shown, certainly in the rendering over here, but it is in the footprint in the plan of the building.
right. And I'm glad that we're doing that, but I'm just seeing that there's opportunity to do it more. I mean, for example, when our buildings were designed originally, we didn't have all of we had one psychologist besides educators, right? In 75. And so we've had to find space. And if you look at some of our buildings, we've actually had to take some beautiful spaces that had all kinds of natural lighting and actually put in partitions because we didn't foresee the need. And so all I'm saying is that I'm strongly suggesting that we flatten that line on the lead and fill that in so that we can more easily utilize that space when we need it.
So noted.
Okay. Okay, and then for field, I'm kind of setting this up. Okay, so validate for me for field, there's a high and low point at the footprint that we have, correct?
On the site, yes.
Yeah, on the site. And the high point is closer to North Avenue, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So therefore you want to put the building at the high point, correct?
Right.
And therefore that's why we have it there.
Right.
Okay. So I'm still looking at a little bit of a concern that we're so close to North Avenue. And especially if we're having the playground at that corner. So I'm just kind of, when I looked at the visual this time, I kind of envisioned, is it possible to bring in Dave Smith? I'm sorry, I don't know the number for the slide for field, but if you move the buildings closer to Emroy, I think is the street, and you put the playground behind it, is that safer?
Yeah, and here's the point. We'd have to have that conversation with the entire team yet as well.
Okay.
There's no saying that there's going to be a playground in the front in that corner over there. That was just an idea that came across during the course of several conversations. So, but to your point, maybe it makes more sense to move, if we do have a playground specifically for kindergartners, move it to the east side of the building, get it away from the traffic and not even have that fence there. Yeah.
It's just something that I happened to see when you put it up there this time.
Good idea.
Because otherwise, where would the playground be?
Right.
Well, the main playground is to the south. It's kind of shaped like a jelly bean.
Okay.
They're just looking at a possible second playground for kindergartners.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. I think that's it.
Okay.
My questions were addressed in our prior discussion, so thank you. Appreciate the work.
Craig, I had a couple of things, and it's more nervousness. None of these have been priced. What we basically said is ICI is pricing all this stuff now. They just got a set of drawings that is currently being vetted, right? So This is always the cart and the horse conversation that now, I guess, if this is going to be shown, right, I can grab it off of board docs, so anybody can grab it off of board docs, right? So is the public now going to become smitten with this? And until ICI prices it, we don't know that we can actually afford it. And then it's hard to retract the thing back, right? Because it looks, by the way, they look great. I mean, really, White does you guys do a fantastic job, by the way. I should start with that. The schools look great. I mean, all of them look, it's top notch, right? I mean, I'm at Field and the school, I wish my kids would go there, right? They'll be out of it, but I wish they would walk into that building because it just is a sharp looking building. So my only concern is, there's a lot happening there and there's a lot of skin element. There's a lot of envelope. And my concern is if the budget afforded it, that's great. And maybe we're going to buy any bad economy. So that helps us buy more than what we typically buy. I just get nervous if someone grabs this and says, this is what Field's going to look like. And then we go through the estimating process and we can't afford X, Y, and Z. And now it doesn't. Now we're retracting stuff. And it is that cart and horse makes me very nervous, especially, there's the ins and outs scare the crap out of me, right? There's just a lot of envelope there.
Yeah.
So that,
and point taken, Rob, it's something that we struggled with, kind of behind the scenes. But the other point to keep in mind is we want to make sure that everybody is heard, being able to share that with board members ahead of time with and this committee with the caveat that it is an iterative process. And, we need to stand ready to make sure that the budget aligns with everything that we have intended for, for the image as well as the footprint. So, you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? But
you have to show the dream.
Yeah. Well, it's we're keeping close tabs on it for sure, and staying in contact with everybody. So as things develop, we're going to be bringing iterations back, certainly moving forward.
And I've heard you say this word before, not knowing the square footages, but the parity, right? So if you later on when these are developed, the cost per square foot of field is going to be relatively equal to the cost per square foot. You take site work out of it, right? Because site work, but the building itself, the cost for the buildings on a cost per square foot should be the same dollar value, right? We're not spending more, we're not making Field more elegant than Lincoln or Lincoln more elegant than Field. I mean, they look pretty, they all have a little different niche because they're different sites, but.
Yep.
Okay.
Parity is the word of the day. And actually been the word of the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay. I know you like that word.
Mm-hmm.
And then, this corner, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my board docs. Can you go back to the Field? Just so really stormwater management is going to become another hot button topic here in Elmhurst right now. Literally people are already trying to organize to put people in place to say, we are going to storm the beaches of Normandy here and fix stormwater. So one of my concerns in not knowing, because I literally couldn't leave my driveway on Sunday night. And maybe Todd knows that back corner, if you go to this back corner adjacent to North Avenue and 290 at that intersection that's on the screen now, I know the old cafeteria takes water at Field. Does that back corner take water?
Because that's going to be area, Rob. That's a detention area, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting the detention now underneath the playground or the parking lot. So it's going to be underground detention.
What I guess what I'm saying is 290 floods, Craig, in this area, right? So 290 are literally floods, so you can't drive. And I just want to make sure in the current condition, right? Does that, not what we're going to do to manage our stormwater. It's because we can't control, right, the downstream effect of the neighbor, which is the tollway.
Right.
So Todd, I don't know if that area floods.
That's why we're putting that more towards North Avenue, because that's the high side of the property. Now down there by the playground and stuff, it does hold water and it does flood down there. But with this design of having the detention under the parking lot and the building more towards North Avenue, I think we're going to be fine. Worst comes worst, maybe that playground maybe get some water, but I don't think it's going to come into the building.
Okay.
Well, go ahead, Rob. But when you're done, I want to continue
go ahead.
The conversation there.
The other thing, just from and maybe it's a political discussion more than anything, is we're going to be doing all this work. Do you tell the city, and I don't know the relationship between the district and the city of Elmhurst, to say, we're spending X. Do you want to buddy up here and put in Y to show the neighbors that you're going to, while we're digging a hole, you're going to dig it another 10 feet deeper and add some more stormwater detention in these areas? I mean, because it that is part of my fear is, we're going to become the bad guy because we're doing new work, and and whatever we're doing, it's never going to be enough, right? Because somebody's house 4 blocks down flooded, and they're going to blame the new construction. So, and maybe it's a political discussion and just, food for thought. And that way, if the city said no, say, hey, we asked, we're taking care of our house, but you guys, you don't want to buddy up, not our problem. So, sorry, that's what I got.
No, good comments.
Okay, to that point, Craig, and I guess Todd, so that's what I was trying to say is we know on our site where we flood, which is where the playgrounds and the parking lot are today, correct? I mean, in this diagram, yes?
Yes.
Okay, but the question that, based on what Rob is saying, my question is, then the on this picture, it's the east side, but it's actually the bottom of the picture. Does that all flood? And then it's the North Avenue. So where they close off the exit on 294 at North Avenue, Lake Street, et cetera, which would then be our east and our north. So I guess that I want to understand, how are we looking at it from a stormwater issue?
Okay. So there's a couple things happening right now in conjunction with doing the design work. We have a civil engineer who has met several times with city officials. So they go through all the detention requirements for the site, expectations that the city will have on what we're proposing over here, and then they work through all the calculations and the configurations of the bounds of the detention. I could not comment and about Rob's idea about partnering and extending the quantity of detention on site. That's something that we could take back to our engineer and ask them if they've had that conversation, and we could talk further about that. But as far as stormwater on our site, with what we're showing and what we're pricing right now, we have everything covered.
So we have the remediation of what we have as a current problem based on what we have in place today.
Correct.
And then, so we're accounting for that. But two, yes, what all the municipalities, especially Elmhurst, is looking at whenever you have new construction like we are, that we now have to look at how much more water or footprint that we don't have natural space that we can absorb it. So that's why we're putting it underground. And are we doing more than what it calls for?
I would have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
I know for a fact we're not addressing, flooding issues in the neighborhood. That's not
right.
I mean, that would be well beyond the bounds of this project.
Correct. Yep.
And that's I don't we would not expect you to, right? We would not expect you to go unless we said as a district, right? Unless the district said, hey, if it's 10 years is the standard operating procedure, like, we work for McMaster-Carr, which is a private company that does business in Elmhurst, big firm. The standard is 10 years. They're doing 100, right? They said, we want 100-year storm system at our site because we don't want to be blamed, right? We're the big bad industry in town. So they went to that extent, right? They literally put in 100-year storm system there. And I don't know if the district wants to commit that many dollars to it, but the joint partnership, I mean, New Trier High School is going to do that. And, Winnetka is doing a huge stormwater project, and Winnetka's, it's a partnership, right? They're putting some stuff in. New Trier is going to put some stuff in. So these, and I don't know what the relationship is obviously between the two, but those do happen and could have mutual benefits.
That's a smart and fair question. So we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah. And
I
if there,
just want to point out that when we sat there with the city about the Edison project, we looked at it and we discussed with them if they wanted to put additional detention out there, but they felt there was no need for it, that what we had there was good. And we are partnering with the city with stormwater detention over at York too. So we've been working with them. They're going to see these designs when we bring, once we have them, we have preliminary meetings with them and go over everything. And we'll talk to them about that too. But, if additional stormwater detention out here doesn't help the neighborhood, then they won't do it. But if it would help the neighborhood, then that would be something that they would have to pony up the cost.
right. And that's, yeah. And it's a different week this week than it was a couple weeks ago.
So I do think,
I just want to let you know on another thing that we're using. Sorry, I know it's hard with all this, but over at Emerson, there's been problems in the subdivision out there. So we're doing our work here, and we've had a couple different meetings with the city of trying to combine the work, saying, okay, here's what we're doing out here. So, and seeing if what we're doing can follow in for them to do some additional work for those subdivision people. So we shared all our surveys with them. They've been in the meetings with them. So we do have that partnership working on some of this new construction with the city.
Cool. Okay.
yeah, this is Chris. I just had a quick comment. I do think that, stormwater retention it's an important issue on all of our projects, and I think some good points there. And I think it'd be worth at least understanding what is the incremental cost to us if we wanted to kind of do more than just what was required, and kind of give us a menu of, how much more and what would that cost be, et cetera, so that we can look at that and evaluate it in the context of the rest of the budget. And I agree with the comments on budget. We discussed it, Terry, when we talked about the plans at first, that they look nice. I sort of will formulate my opinions after I find out how much it costs. So, yeah.
Okay.
The beauty is you're going to buy it in a great economy to buy it. So you're going to buy more. If you get it out in time, you'll buy it in a hope. What was a good thing for a school district, a bad thing for the rest of the people paying for it. Right. It's a double-edged sword.
Well, we'll see what the economy does here in the next 6 months or so when we release the project for bidding. The other thing I'll point out, expanding the water storage has to have space for that as well too. So it's not so much a money issue as it is a space availability issue on the site.
Got it. Okay.
All right. So as a civil engineer, I find myself in the weird standpoint of asking a question about interior design as opposed to stormwater for once.
Okay.
So Emerson, the slide 1314, where we're talking about the LRC, the library area, and the changes there.
Keep going.
A couple more.
Right
yeah,
there.
those two.
There you go.
So the existing, I'll call them offices that are in there, the 4 or 5 spaces that are there are currently used by speech therapists and social workers, et cetera. Is there an idea about where it is that those people are going to go to be able to meet with their students?
Yeah, and that's a conversation. That's a good point. That's a good conversation that we're going to have with the principal at the next round of meetings that we have. So we'll definitely make sure that they have a place to house themselves and the kids. And it might be that we just expand or even look at some of those blue boxes that you see over there, and designate those areas for them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Beth. I just wanted to, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Speak to what Rob was talking about with putting the preliminary designs out and people falling in love with them off the bat. And then maybe we have to make some changes for budget or other reasons. I do think I completely understand what you're saying, Rob. I do think it's nice for the community to kind of be a part of the process and see how we work through some of those things. And then down the road, if they are thinking, gosh, I wonder why they didn't put more glass over on this side, or I wonder why they didn't use some different materials, or and those kinds of things, they'll have seen the process we went through and why we made the decisions we did. So I do think it's nice that they can see how we work through that process as well. So I just wanted to mention that.
No, I agree. It's hard because there's no. If you do it in a vacuum, then you're guilty for doing it in a vacuum.
Right.
If you do it out in the public, you're guilty. So I think Craig mentioned that. And I just it's.
I see your
hard.
point completely.
Yeah, it's whichever way you're wrong because you made a decision that 40 other thousand people weren't involved in. I look at it just right now. You've got COVID happening, so you've got unemployment. Everybody in DuPage just got their tax bill that all went up. Right. And now we're showing them really nice looking things. And some of these people are like, why is this even going to happen? And they probably need to be reminded that this was passed. You voted for this. And now we have to do this. Right. It's just that level. And, I have some friends that are a lot smarter than me. They're even asking, like, they're stopping all that. I'm like, no, they're not. Why would you stop it? It's part of it. We've now committed to doing it. Mm-hmm. So it'll be a fun ride.
More and more communication necessary.
I think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Just letting people understand the process.
Yep.
Important.
I do think in this environment that if we make changes to conceptual plans for budget reasons, I doubt we'll get pushback. So I think folks understand and frankly probably want us to be as budget conscious as possible. So I think it's a good point, but a manageable risk for us to let people see the process as it unfolds.
Got it.
Okay, does anybody else have anything for us? I think there's a couple of things that Leanne would like to wrap things up with here.
Yeah, David, if you could advance a few slides. Yeah, right there. Oh, right there. So we've included the overall schedule, just showing you where May is falling on the group 2, and we're right on track. As we said, ICI is looking at costs right now, and somewhere around the week of June 10th, we should know where we're at. Next slide. So the next 3 slides are some information, and I don't expect you to read it now, and we're not going to run through it. But what this represents is we're looking at a process just like with design of the facades of the building. We're looking at the design of the sustainability level of the projects as well to see how much energy we can save and how sustainable we can be, keeping water on site, everything that we've talked about. We're tracking it on a chart like this, and it will evolve and change as we go through it. But we wanted to show you that we compared all of the categories of sustainability using the LEED scoring system, which you've probably heard of. But the green column represents kind of a baseline of good practice, things that you're doing right now, code-related, good practice, all of the good things that we're incorporating in the building to reduce energy use and consumption of water and various other things right away. So that's all included in the project as we move through. The next column is LEED certified, then it's the gold, silver, and it kind of goes all the way up in progression to the net zero column that was talked about in the public comment, all the way to the right in the blue. So if you scroll down, we can skip to the next slide, and then this is just continuing on. Again, we won't read it, but it just shows all the categories that we have that we're looking at, not only where the site is, but the energy and atmosphere, water efficiency, going through materials that'll be used in the project. We're looking at all these categories, indoor air quality. You can skip to the next slide. But the bottom line is, and I kind of blew up the numbers a little bit, and these will vary and change. This is just an order of magnitude to kind of show you as you work through sustainability, there can be some initial costs to that. These can vary and these can change depending on which items you work through in the chart on the previous 2 pages. But it does show that, as you move through, there is some significant cost to a net zero design that has been discussed. In the red text right above that, that might be hard for you to read right now, we did show that there are grants indeed, as the public commenter mentioned, the Illinois Clean Energy Grant. You can request up to $2 million when you're looking at a net zero project. However, there is a little bit of risk, and it is a process that you go through. You have to prove after the building is built, you have to prove for a year that you are net zero to get the grant fund. So there are some considerations to that, and we have offered that before and are certainly willing to do it, but there is an initial cost right now that is not fitting in the basic budget. But we did want to comment on that and are willing to work through all the sustainability features, as we go throughout the project. So just wanted to let you know that was for information. And then if you have any other questions or would like more information on this, we certainly can bring that up at another time too. And I think that concludes our presentation tonight.
One thing on that, Leanne, just that $2 million, because you're probably one of the only ones that built a net zero, right? What was Sunset Ridge? So was there a similar grant in place at that time when you guys went through that process?
There was not. So Sunset Ridge, yes, I was the manager on that project, and we did achieve net zero, but it was tight, and they did it a little bit differently. They had outside funding, and they funded the photovoltaic array, which in our chart makes up about $1.2 million of the cost. They funded that through a unique program that they're using with a third-party provider,
right,
essentially using the roof. So, and that's a little tricky, and there's a cost to that too. Your finance committee could look at a lot of that. So like I said, these numbers can vary and there's different ways to do it. But right now, a lot of people are trying to and getting the clean energy grants, but there is a fair amount of risk and work to that.
Got it. Yeah, just $2 million, right? It makes the math. If someone grabs that number, it's
right.
Right. And you're highly unlikely, right, to get that.
It's a process.
Yeah.
They actually just recently doubled the award amount from 1 million to 2 million.
Right.
So this is kind of current information as far as available grants.
Right.
So the less projects apply, the better chances, right?
Say that again.
The less projects that apply for that grant, right? They have an X number of dollars per year to spend in that grant.
Yeah, you have to apply, but I think everybody has the opportunity of getting 2 million. They don't say take 2 million and divvy it up between 5 schools.
Okay,
right.
So it's up to 2 million. Oh, cool. Yeah. So you got a better chance of getting a bigger dollar.
Right.
What's the time frame? Like, when would you have to start working on
that? Very soon. We're working on all of the points and categories right now up to the point of a net zero, because right now we're not looking at something that you would need major, like a photovoltaic array on the roof. That is not in the works, but most of the other categories we're well in working on them, as well as a matter of fact, the schematic design submittal that went to ICI does show the scorecard of where we're at in the sustainability range and where we're tracking. So the conversation's still open, and up to about LEED Silver, there you don't see the big cost, although the ratings have changed as our country's become better at being conservative. They've upped the ante. Of a lot of prerequisites have to be accomplished now that you used to get a point for. So they've kind of upped the baseline to achieve like LEED Silver. But you're going to do very well at saving energy and reducing costs initially. So we'll keep you updated where this is falling.
So just I'm not expert in this field, so it sounds as though if you're not just having a label of net zero is the significance. It sounds like, because if you hear people, I mean, they're just like, you're a net zero. Oh, okay, then you're doing everything. And if you're not net zero, then yeah, you're probably not doing sustainability. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It does not work that way.
Yeah.
Net zero is kind of a whole nother level of where you are in sustainability. And it's attractive because, you know, people can see a photovoltaic array on the roof and it looks very active. But really, you're doing a large amount of sustainability work at the base levels to even get up to that net zero. I mean, you know, the scale is heavily tipped when you're just doing LEED certified or responsible design these days to meet the Illinois Energy Code. Your baseline building and being just LEED certified or silver are tremendous leaps from where you are now in the buildings. So, you know, everyone should be commended that just getting the base level design that we're doing right now is going to be great savings for you on energy costs and water conservation.
I think that there is room. I think there is room in people's understanding of sustainability for a spectrum of outcomes. You know, I know some folks feel very strongly about net zero, and net zero has some benefits that are real. We also have budget constraints, so I think if we choose a point on this distribution that has a attractive cost benefit analysis for the district, I think folks will understand. And being, you know, maybe in the middle of the spectrum or something along those lines, it does advance the sustainability agenda quite a bit, as you mentioned, from an energy consumption standpoint and therefore from a cost standpoint, I think as well. So thank you very much for putting this together. I think it's very interesting to see the cost associated with each of these points along the spectrum here. And I know we'll touch on this many times again as we go through the rest of the process. Yeah. So thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you.
Leanne, it's Jim Collins. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the numbers you presented here. These numbers are not for a specific design that we have, but a hypothetical 75,000 square foot school building, correct?
Correct. We took a couple of models and kind of merged it to give you probably the most conservative numbers that we could. You have a wide range of choice. And yes, these are not your specific buildings, but we tried to give you something, you know, close, but it's built off of a model of several schools.
Okay. And then when you gave us target budgetary numbers for each building, at what level of LEED certification were you budgeting to?
We are shooting to design your building to LEED silver as much as we can. Recently, the LEED levels have changed, and we are analyzing that on your scorecard right now and certainly think it's achievable. But we do want to be cautionary right now at this early stage. And this conversation will probably have to be, you know, continued and you know, talked about in depth as we get through the phases.
And what is the appropriate timing to have those discussions about particularly Lincoln and Field for that matter? But, you know, Lincoln is the first building.
Right. Well, they're ongoing right now. You know, certainly the schematic design submittal, as I mentioned, we did score the LEED scorecard, and we're looking at the points levels right now. So, you know, we could go deeper into that with you or with a group, but we're having the conversation and working on that right now within our teams.
Okay. We're probably going to have another one of these Finance and Operations Committee meetings in June. Can we put on that agenda to have a little bit more in-depth discussion about particularly third-party and grant opportunities that may help fund a higher level than perhaps is budgeted right now?
Absolutely. We would really, you know, our company really loves that. So we would really enjoy that. So absolutely.
All right. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you, Leanne and Craig. We will move on to the update on the bond market with Elizabeth Hennessy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Chris?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. If you want to flip the slides forward, we'll go through the market update. So this shows for the district where we've been with the various interest rate changes. They've been dramatic recently. We look back at interest rates in November of 2018 when the referendum was passed. Then on July 23rd, 2019, when the first phase, 60 million of the bonds were issued. And then where we are now. So we've got the yellow line is the 30-year AAA MMD, the red line is a 10-year AAA MMD, and the purple line is the 1-year. The blue line is a treasury. And what happened during the realization that we're heading into a pandemic is that the municipal bond market dislocated from the U.S. Treasury market and rates went up by over 200 basis points, then came down 150 basis points, up 75, down 65, and it's been oscillating like that ever since. The last week has been a good week. We've seen interest rates come down about 25 basis points. So you can see where we are as of Friday, the 15th. We're a little bit, looks to be a little bit higher in certain terms, but let's go to the next page and we can see the actual rates. So the low point was March 9th, and you can see the 10-year AAA municipal market data rate was down to 0.78% there. And this is when the time frame we passed the resolution and wanting to hit some of these historic lows, and rates went up 2%. And you see all the various volatility. We're now down to 1.01% on that 10-year AAA municipal market data index rate. And just to review, that index is a compilation of the strongest AAA rated states in the union. It's published daily, and it is not representative of interest rates in Illinois. Since the pandemic has come forth, there's been a lot of news about the state of Illinois. Fitch rating agency has downgraded the state. All 3 rating agencies have the state on negative outlook. So this kind of news, as well as other news with Illinois in the headlines in a negative manner, has caused the spread over the AAA MMD to widen. Okay, so last week, the state was in the market with an $800 million deal for capital, and they paid a rate of 5.85%. So obviously, that impacts all municipalities in the state, even strongly rated AA pluses like the district. So let's go to the next page. This is just a recap of the promise, and this is updated as of 2019 when we did the 60 million, and we have the 2018 EAV in here, so we don't have that updated quite yet, but we will get that shortly. We originally planned in 2021 to issue 50 million of the 168.5 million authorization, along with some refunding that's currently callable in April of 21. So this is kind of the promise that we had looked at as recently as July with the actual, no, I take that back. This is the actual promise plan before July. So this is what we had told the taxpayers. Let's go to the next page. Okay, so the next page is the proposed option that we authorized, the 40 million issued here in June of 2020. And then coming back in April of 21 with a 15 million of new money plus the refunding. And then the final issue in January of 23, and that amount is 53.5 million. So this scenario is kind of what we're trying to currently accomplish, and the rates are good, but again, we're paying more because of what's happening in the state than is reflected in the base AAA MMD rate. So right now we're looking at an estimated rate of 3%. We've got more capitalized interest to issue the 40 million sooner. And we see our average annual debt service is nice and low at 50 cents versus the 57 cents tax rate we were originally planning on at the time of the promise. So let me just mention that during the last couple weeks, I've been talking to Chris Welton and Jim about a structure that helps minimize the capitalized interest, whereas investors pre-COVID pretty strenuously demanded bonds with 4% coupon rates. They're now looking at 3% coupon rates and some discount bonds. That helps us because it helps the interest payments and the capitalized interest be lower on this issue. So that's the good news. I think the bad news is our market is still plagued with the Illinois penalty. So the other thing I would like to mention is that these bonds have a cushion in the interest rates. So the Series 20 and 21 are based on current market conditions as of May 14th. The Series 21 has a 1% cushion, and the Series 23 has a 1.5% interest rate cushion in it to try to be conservative. So let's go to the next page. And here we see, if you can see that, this is the comparison of the promise as shown in the green line, the average annual debt service at 17.3 million and the 57-cent tax rate on average versus the current options. So we're obviously much lower, but do notice in the first 5 years, the red line representing the current option, the payments are a bit higher than the promise. But then in the year 2024, that red line goes well below the proposed promise line of the green line. So overall, the debt service is much less expensive. And we talked about this when we did these bonds in July of 2019, that we would have short-term a little bit higher rates and then lower rates for the majority of the time. And in 2020, I also want to mention the taxes people are paying now are no different than they would have paid on the outstanding debt. Okay, so there's no increase in this structure till we get to next year, 2021. Let's go to the last page, or second to the last page, I guess. If you can read this, and I think you do have this on your computer so you can make it big, you can look year to year, the promise is shown on top and the impact on a $500,000 home in each year versus the current option. And here you really can see how those bars going out longer are so much lower. The gray matter in the background is the payments on the old bonds prior to the referendum. And then let's go to the last page. This is what I call the purple and green. So the promise showed in the first 7 years that the payment increase on average over those first 6 years, 6 or 7 years, would be $67. And then the last 17 years, it would be $882. Under the current option, we're looking at a little higher payment over the first 7 years of $99 versus $67. And again, on average over this 7-year period, but over the last 17 years, the payment's going to be much lower at $723. So this is kind of an update of where we're at. And we had a conversation on Friday about where should we go in the future? When should we issue this 40 million? A couple relevant facts. We talked about that break even last time we met, and that was back in March, April. It was about 60 basis points, meaning that the interest rates would have to increase by 60 basis points by the time we issued the bonds in April of 2021 to make us better off issuing the bonds now versus waiting. Again, because of the capitalized interest, the extra interest cost. I'm sorry, I should have gone to let's go to the very last slide. The break even under this 3% coupon structure is now 30 basis points. So it's lower. So that's a good thing. That drives us, to think about issuing these bonds now, because 30 basis points certainly can happen. The reason I think we're at least my recommendation is maybe we should wait a bit is because of that Illinois penalty. Under the pandemic, under what the Fed is doing, rates are low, they're staying low in the Treasury market and continuing. We think they will be low for the foreseeable future until the economy is recovered. The Illinois penalty is not low. I don't know exactly when it's going to be lower, but when the state gets its budget together in the coming weeks, I think it'll be a very positive thing for the rating agencies to see. Even if it's a 6-month budget, to see what the plan is. If the income tax passes in the fall, that's going to be a very positive factor for the state of Illinois' rating and therefore for everyone else. So the state is one factor, but it really does impact the district in that those spreads are wider. This just gives us a little history of the impact on this 40 million. When we first started looking at this back in on March 9th, where we hit some of the lowest interest rates that we had, but this was with the 4% coupon structure. March 17th and April 7th was one of the highest times where the spread was super wide as well as interest rates were high. Interest rates then came down on May 7th and May 15th even more. So here we're at a pretty low level. But given that we think interest rates are going to continue to be low, it seems like it would make sense to just continue to be in the ready position, see if we see a little improvement as the state comes out in the next week or so with its new budget, and be ready to go and keep updating the group. Questions?
I think that rationale makes sense. I mean, I think your comments around interest rates being low for a long period of time makes a lot of sense to me. It's particularly in just the degree of economic contraction that we're all living through right now. I think the incentive to keep them low is extremely high. So that I think tips me over the edge in terms of waiting. I'm concerned about the Illinois discount getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm not sure if folks on the call appreciate how unique it is for a muni to be issuing at almost 6%. So maybe you could just quote real quick a better position state and where they're able to issue debt, just for contrast.
Yeah, there's really no state that is issuing debt as high as Illinois. I mean, you see bonds in the 2 to 3 to 4%, or I'd say 2 to 3% is more likely for strong rated states in the A and AA category. California, I mean, even though every state is going to suffer and have problems with this pandemic, unfortunately, our state is the least prepared because very little flexibility in its cushion and its fund balance, if you will. So it's quite a contrast. And unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, we could not even get the notes, the 1.2 billion of notes the district was bidding out, the state was bidding out for 1 year. Those were unable to get placed. And the state may be looking to the Fed now to borrow from them. But
And if Illinois gets moved into high yield, I think are they just one notch above
yeah, we're
high
not.
yield at this point?
Yes, that's right. We're still investment grade, negative outlooks across the board. So one more rating downgrade, the state will be junk.
Yeah, and if that happens, will our ratings be affected?
Given that the district is not dependent very much on the state of Illinois, I do not think your ratings will be impacted. Those districts that are much more dependent on state funding will be impacted. The other thing to know is every month that we wait, we save $192,000 in interest, even with this 3% coupon structure. So that's a good fact, as long as we know rates are going to pretty much stay low.
Yeah. And I just have one more question with regards to liquidity in the market. I know, the sell-off initially in fixed income markets was very liquidity driven. And my understanding is that has started to normalize for municipal issuers, but is the new issue market back to robust levels like we're seeing elsewhere in fixed income, or not much issuance yet?
There's a lot of supply waiting in the wings in Illinois. The buyers that are back are really banks and insurance companies. The thing that really drove some of our sales was the purchase by separately managed accounts, which are big managers who manage money for lots of individuals. And that was a huge force in our market that is not back yet. And that's one of the reasons the IFA structure looked so good, where we went through the Illinois Finance Authority and we got state tax exemption, because those individuals that were investing under those separately managed accounts had huge demand for that. So that part of the buying is not really back yet. That's why the 3% structure seems to work well, because that is something that insurance companies and banks are not opposed to at all, and gives you lower interest costs throughout the life of your bonds.
Okay, thank you for the thoughts. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, Elizabeth, it's Jim Collins. I have a couple of things. As we discussed, I agree that waiting is the thing to do here, given that our costs go down every month we wait. And in November, I can imagine if the governor gets his tax increase, that Illinois spreads come in, and we can benefit from that. And if the tax increase does not pass, I'm guessing that the rating agencies weigh in with a rating downgrade. So that's, there's two sides to waiting, just so we're aware of that risk. But then the other thing I'd like you to reemphasize, Beth asked me this question a week or two ago, and then Rob Martinelli brought it up again about everybody opening their real estate tax bill. Mm-hmm. And since our referendum got such big publicity, and people see their real estate tax bill go up, and I think a lot of people don't want to do a line by line comparison, but if you could just reemphasize that our real estate taxes did not go up this year due to our successful referendum. I think that's important for everybody when they get a comment from their friends, to be able to tell them with confidence.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. If you scoot back 2 or 3 pages to page 5, and you look at the line that says levy year 2019, year taxes paid 2020, you see the amount, $13,603,000. That's the current currently owed debt service levy from the currently existing bonds. And if you go over to the total debt service, you see that number, 13,603,000 again, 4 columns from the right. There's absolutely no change there. We have a tax rate of about 0.49 cents for debt, which is essentially the same as it was the prior year. This doesn't have the EAV increase in there. You know, it's so hard as a homeowner when you look at your tax bill, it's all put together in one, and it can go up for so many reasons because the value of your home went up, which I'm sure it did. And Chris, I don't have that number percent increase, but I'm pretty sure your EAV went up by what, 4% or 5%? So that is alone is going to, if your value goes up versus your neighbors, or if you put it on an addition, or, everybody's levying the CPI, which is 1.9%, right? So there's just lots of things that can make that tax bill go up, but debt is not the reason this year.
And to be fair, Elizabeth, I mean, we did levy that 1.9% for our operating budget. And, people's taxes did increase due to that 1.9%, but not due to the referendum.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else for Elizabeth?
Just a quick thank you for the continuing work for the district. Much appreciated.
You bet. My pleasure.
Yeah, Elizabeth does do a great job. It's good to have you on our team.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Chris, then I'll hand it back to you and move on.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. David, could you put up the presentation? This is the financial implications of COVID-19 for the school district. So I wanted to just touch on some of the things that are impacting the school district this year and next year. So these first 3 slides are just kind of a summary. And then I go into more detail on some of the bigger items. So this first top item, property taxes, and this is our largest item, 83.3% of our revenues, and our operating or our tax extension. And tax extension means the total of all, or if you summed up or added together all of the property tax bills that went out or that go out for the entire year. Our operating tax extension is 112.8 million, and then the bond portion, the debt, is 13.6. So our total extension is 126.4 million. So this is the biggest item on the revenue side for the school district. The county passed a waiver for those impacted by COVID-19 with loss of employment, that sort of thing. So we could be looking at potentially less, collecting less in May and June than we have in the last couple of years. But that really would only result in shifting from the May and June collection to the fall, September-October collections. So we don't expect a real revenue loss, as more of a shift related to the tax collections. And we received the first, so there's a first collection in May. This year it came in at 2.1 million. Last year that same payment was 2.9 million. But that's a small piece of it. We get another collection June 1st, and then another collection June 15th. That will give us a better indication of where those May, June taxes are that are in fiscal year 20. And then when I talk about next year's levy is based on the CPI that came out in January, which was from last calendar year, was 2.3%. So that's the levy that we'll be doing this December for next calendar year. And in addition to that, TIF 3, which is the Portillo's, Kohl's, what's that, Home Goods, that shopping center on 83 and St. Charles is TIF 3. That is coming back onto the tax rolls for the levy in December. So I actually go into that a little later, so I don't need to really go on to it. But then the current CPI is going to be very low, and that is for the following levy, which is in December of 21, and that is for calendar year 22. So that is the one that is a real concern, which would be a very small increase because of a low CPI in addition to a low new construction number would be the calendar year 22, meaning June and September of 22, which we normally associate with fiscal year 23. So that year is the year that I am very worried about. And I'll go into more detail about that. So then CPPRT is corporate personal property replacement tax. That budget for us is about $2,050,000. Through April, we're at $1,650,000. So it's really tracking, maybe a little less than expectations because this most recent in May collection was lower, and it's likely that's lower because of the delay in the income tax filings, and CPPRT it comes from corporate income taxes, so I do expect that to go down some. When I look back on historical CPPRT, our low was about 1.6 million, so I would expect that $2,050,000 may go down to about 1.6 million. That's what's in my projections. So that's CPPRT. Student fees, when I look back in history, look back after the recession, student fees, they go down a little bit because our fee waivers will go up. But this line item, we're talking about 1.7, 1.8 mil, might go down a couple $100,000, somewhere in there. I would, that's kind of student fees. We will lose some on fee waivers because we'll have an increase in fees being waived. And I point out that we did not charge for spring athletics. So we will be less than budget when we finish this fiscal year because we didn't charge for spring athletics. We refunded some for parking. We refunded for the paid access transportation program, not the whole, a prorated amount for those things. Rental fees, this line item is budgeted at $290,000. So far this year, we've taken in $260,000. We're unlikely to get any more, but because we stopped renting in March, we don't know. But as you know, the facility rental is a break even, so our costs go down as well. So when we don't rent our facilities, our expenditures go down and our revenues go down. So that's down about $30,000 from budget, $260,000 on a budget of $290,000. Food service, we're expecting the food service department to be a loss this year. That is a 1.9 million revenue line. We're at 1.3 million. So that's food services. Interest income, the rates have really declined. We had over the years, this has gone up some. We had gotten it up to a budget of about 1.5 million. In our projections, I'm projecting that to go back down to like 300,000 in the next 3 or 4 years. That is going to go down significantly because the rates have just fallen off to where we're getting very little in interest income. So David, I've reached the next slide. State funding, evidence-based funding is not impacted at all. We are right on pace to get the 6.5 million that we will get in evidence-based funding. State funding in total is about 9.3 million for the school district. Evidence-based funding is 6.5 of that, and the mandated categoricals is 2.4 million of the 9.3 million. MCAT started the year 1 quarter delinquent. We'll likely be 2 quarters delinquent when we finish June 30th. We did just get a quarter in May. We got the December payment in May. Is that right? I have it. Wait, now let me make sure. Verify that. We'll touch on this later. But we just got in May the December quarter. So we are currently delinquent on the March quarter, and I don't think we'll get March or June in this fiscal year. So we would finish 2 quarters behind. Federal funding, that's about a $4 million line item for us. The title grants, we probably won't expend all the title grants in the current year, so we would have a carryover into next year on the title grants. In addition, we are expecting to get this CARES Act stimulus funds, which is $283,653. Piece of that goes to parochial schools. Some of it is for the uses of the CARES Act is to help technology for e-learning, as well as supplies needed related to the COVID-19, so sanitizer, that sort of thing. And we also applied for a FEMA grant as well. But the FEMA grant won't fully fund or won't reimburse us for all costs. So, but we will apply for that as well. Or we did apply for that. The next slide. Health insurance. This is a big line item for us. I think about 12 or 13 million. We were having not the best year, where we had some very large health insurance claims in the fall. So we were definitely concerned what the increases might be. But then the last few months, we've had some very low claim months, and we expect to have a few more low claim months. So that's going to help to mitigate what was going to be a larger increase. So, and the plans that were hit with the large claims mainly was the HMO Blue Advantage, but also the PPO 1. The other 2 plans have been performing or have low claims. The HSA plan has very low claims, and the HMO Illinois has very low claims. So those we were looking at, we could be flat with a 0 increase for next year. The Blue Advantage and the PPO 1 plan, we're trending to looking at about a 3% increase on those 2 plans. Classroom supplies, just that because we left in March, there should be some classroom supplies left over. I do think that our copier charges are down because no one is there making copies. So we're saving on click charges. I also think that we're using less paper. So we'll have some stockpile of paper, and printing charges are less. Sanitizing, and as I said, some of this sanitizing should be covered in that CARES Act grant. Purchasing, I think we've ordered 10,000 masks, a ton of gloves, sanitizer for the custodians to clean, but also we will need hand sanitizer, hand sanitizing stations. We're going to need thermometers to measure temperature on staff and also on students. So that there's going to be needing to purchase more equipment, but again, the CARES Act should cover some of those expenses. Substitute teachers, obviously, will have a favorable budget line item since we didn't need to use subs in March through the end of the year. But definitely have concerns about high risk and staff attendance in the 21 school year related to COVID-19. Energy costs, Todd jumped on putting the schools in unoccupied mode, saving consumption on energy, and rates were down already on gas and natural gas and energy. So the 5th grade classroom furniture. As far as next year on capital projects, we've postponed the Bryan parking lot. We've started to talk about possibly postponing the purchase of 4th grade classroom furniture. Transportation, we negotiated for students 75% of normal daily routes, and then 51% with Cottage Hill. As far as next year on busing, I mean, there's a lot of questions about social distancing on busing. That'll be part of the planning discussions related to next school year on that. Technology, I mean, no immediate material impact. We did have to buy some hotspots, but the CARES Act does cover any expenditures since March 13th. So any hotspots that we may have purchased, we could put into CARES Act, or any other technology we need to purchase in order to do e-learning can be in the CARES Act. As far as next year, we have postponed that purchase of display technology for the classrooms. The pension cost shift, it's a big item, and we're going to touch on that later in the presentation, but nothing yet. We don't expect it to happen with the legislators going back to Springfield coming up here in May. It's unlikely that it will happen for next year, but the state is in terrible fiscal crisis, so the possibility of a pension cost shift at some point never seems to die as a possibility and as a looming concern. All right, so the next slide, I've already talked about our revenue mix somewhat, in that we are 89.53 or almost 90% local. Most of it is property taxes, state 7.2%, federal 3.27%. So we're very reliant on property taxes as our main source of revenues. On the next slide, this just kind of goes, we're doing the same kind of thing in a different graph. This is the whole state, where you see the blue line. The blue represents local for the state average, where the next slide you can see which would be Elmhurst. The blue lines are much bigger. This is our chart compared to the state chart. Very, very local, very property tax heavy. The next slide shows that another another slide, all these slides showing property taxes is really where we get our money, 83.3%. The next slide talks about the tax cap and how property taxes is 83.3% of our money, but we are capped to CPI and new construction. Those are the two key figures that show how much increases we get in our property taxes from one year to the next. And every tax year builds on the past year. So if you don't levy for the amount allowable under the tax cap, you lose that amount plus all future years compounding. On the next slide, CPI, it's been averaging 1.5 over the last 5 years, 1.8 over the last 10 years. The current the tax levy we did in December was on the 1.9. The one coming up this December, which will be for next calendar year, is at 2.3%, which is on the far right. The next slide, this shows historical trends of CPI on a monthly basis compared. The red line is this year, which you can see the sharp decline in March and how much lower the current CPI is than all of the previous years. And the next slide shows it again. This is April's data shows that CPI went down even further. The last slide went through March. This slide goes through April. CPI is really going to be low. On the next slide, as I talked about, the two factors, CPI, new construction. This is the new construction. And the one thing that kind of stands out here, you see the year 2016, 17, and 18, each year has the purple slice, which is for TIFs, the TIFs coming back onto the tax rolls, TIF 1 and TIF 2. If we went 1 year further out, 2020, we'll have TIF 3, which is 83 in St. Charles. So we had TIF 1 and 2 in 16, 17, and 18. Luckily in 19, you see that red slice, we did get a good amount of new construction for commercial and industrial. I don't know the specifics of the commercial and industrial new construction that happened in 2019, but that was a helpful bit because the blue, if you see the blue, we're pretty consistent on residential new construction. I mean, obviously it was down in 2012. That was back from the last recession. But you can see the residential new construction has been growing, down a little bit in 19, but I think the residential has been almost 30 million in 15, 33 million in 16, 32 in 17, like 32 million residential new construction in 17, 18, like 27 million of residential new construction in 19. That's really been helping us as far as our increase on our tax extension each year. You get the CPI and you get the new construction. Oh, the following slide, this is just information strictly about that TIF 3 that I've talked about with Portillo's over there at St. Charles in 83. This shows when that TIF originally started, it was 4,215,000. That's the frozen valuation. In 18, it went up to this 12 million. So the difference is $8 million. That's the amount that would come back on the tax rolls as new construction in the upcoming levy in December. Next slide. So this slide, I'm kind of showing the increases each year on our tax extension and showing the blue portion, which is related to the CPI, and the reddish pinkish portion that is related to new construction. So this year in 19, we had 1.9 in CPI and 1.57 in new construction, giving us an increase of about 3.5% increase in year-over-year tax extension. And I point out that the CPI over this 8-year time period averaged 1.73%, which in dollars was about an increase of 1,662,000. From new construction, we've averaged about 1.69%, which is in dollars is 1,658,000. The next slide, I got back into. I do think it gets confusing which CPI goes with which year, so I guess I was going back through it. You know, the last levy that we approved in December was the 1.9% CPI. That's coming in June and September, and so we equate that to next fiscal year 21. Then that's the purple description. Then the orange description, I'm talking about the levy that's coming up in December, which is for calendar year 21, which we relate to fiscal year 22. And that CPI is 2.3%, plus we're going to get the TIF 3 new construction in addition to any residential new construction. So what I guess I'm getting at on this slide is this calendar year property taxes should be okay. Next calendar year, the increase should be pretty good because of the 2.3 CPI and the TIF 3. So calendar year 21, which we consider for fiscal year 22, that increase in property taxes should be pretty good. But then that following year, which is calendar year 22 or fiscal year 23, that is going to be a very low CPI and probably a very low new construction number. And that is the year that really worries me, in revenue increase will be very small. All right, so moving past property taxes, corporate personal property replacement taxes. Some of these slides I just compared to Barrington just to give you, to show that, you know, our stream over history is very similar to other school districts. Ours happens to be higher when you compare corporate personal property replacement taxes. Barrington is very similar to us in a lot of ways. They have one high school. They have about 8,500 students. So we have similar number of, their EAV is a little higher than us, but it's similar. So sometimes I just throw it on there just for comparison, so you can see that the trend is similar. And I guess I'm trying to show that, you know, after the last recession, you did see corporate personal property replacement taxes decrease in 2010 down to about 1.6 million. That's the number that I put in my projections, thinking that income taxes are going down. The other thing is, on the bottom here, I do show that the May payment we just got of $300,000 in comparison to last May was $547. So the May payment was a lot less this year than last year. So that's CPPRT. And because corporate net income is likely to decrease, we're likely to see a decrease in the CPPRT. Interest income, this again, I showed just a comparison on history of us compared to Barrington. And just after the last recession, you see our interest income just fall off the table. and stay there for many years. And then the last few years, it's finally been coming back with higher rates. And now the rates have just flattened out back down. So you'll see this revenue go back down. On the next slide, student fees. Student fees aren't impacted that much by the recession. If you look at our history here after the recession, real flat. We've really tried to keep our student fees flat and not increasing. And but we would expect student fees to go down some with fee waivers for low-income families. That student fees likely to go down a little bit, but you can see they stay pretty flat. The next slide, I get into state funding. This slide shows allocations. This does not take into consideration the delinquencies or the timing of payments. This is the amount allotted by the state to District 205. And as I said, evidence-based funding, we're at $6,505,000. Mandated categoricals at $2.4 million. And then these other grants are at $334,000 for a total of $9.253 million in state funding. On the next slide, I get into a little more about evidence-based funding, where our base fund minimum when evidence-based funding started was that $6,299,000 in the 17-18 column, 6,299,55156. That is our original base fund minimum. You got the tier 4 funding on that, $10,000 to get us to the next year, $6.3 million. And then we were tier 3 that year, so we got $185,000, $6,495,000. Now we got this year tier 4, $9,525,000 in tier funding. So the total tier funding for the 3 years totaled $205,488. So on the next slide, the base fund, the evidence-based funding is a little complicated when the state allocates less money. But the first step is that they take your tiered funding from the last 3 years. So that's why in my projections, I have a few different projections, but in some of my worst case projections that I have at the end here, I went back and reduced the evidence-based funding from the current $6,500,000 to the $6,300,000. But if the state starts funding less each year, if they fund less by $100 million to the formula, then it starts on $61 per pupil for every 100 million. That's the next phase beyond taking the tier funding. So that's when the state. So I mean, I think a lot of the state funding is based on, the state fiscal crisis. And I think Jim was alluding to the graduated income tax in November, and the state currently talking about passing a 6-month budget. So I think a lot of the fiscal crisis will depend on that graduated income tax. And so if the graduated income tax does not pass, then we'll get more into this bottom step where they start taking the evidence-based funding on a per pupil basis away from all school districts. On the next slide, this is kind of history of how the MCATs, the mandated categoricals, where they start prorating and reducing the amounts that they put into mandated categoricals. So mandated categoricals, you got two problems. Number one, they tend to be delinquent and late and 1 or 2, 3 quarters behind. And the other thing is they start giving you less, they reimburse at a lower percentage. So this shows that after the recession in 2008, the state started, you can see, giving less and less money towards mandated categoricals. So the concern with mandated categoricals is prorating and that they're very delinquent. The next slide just kind of shows, we've gotten 3 quarters. This is just one of the mandated categoricals. I just wanted to give an example. This one that came in April 29th actually hit our bank in May. So it's not, that quarter payment isn't in our April monthly financials when you see that later. So that was just kind of, I did put it on here, but it actually came in May, April 29th. That's the December quarter that we just received May 1st. So that's just kind of showing you that there is concern from, and I guess when I did the projections, I put mandated categoricals at 75%, not the full amount of mandated categoricals is what I put in the projections, because we're only getting 3 payments 3 quarters this year. All right. Next slide, expenditures. I always talk about the most important part of the budget. The most important part of the expenditure budget is staffing. I hope that everyone has heard me say that before. Salaries and benefits, 78.67% of our expenditure budget. The next slide, this is Forecast 5 did this comparison of comparing our enrollment increases over this period of time. 2.5% increase in enrollment. At the same time, our teaching FTE went up 16.49%. And I talk about this every year at the budget. We've been averaging adding 11 teachers a year. A lot of it has been EL and special ed. I think the board members have heard me say that before. We've been adding teachers every year. It's not sustainable, but it's primarily been EL and special ed teachers. On the next slide, this shows our teacher FTE, or our student per teacher FTE comparison. Our student per teacher ratio of 14.41 is the second lowest to our comparable groups. The next slide is, I think, the finance committee. I remember Chris Bloom, one of his, he had a lot of sayings. I know Adrian talks about the back of the envelope. Math is one of his old sayings. Jim, I know you remember that one too. And then the other one that he always would say was that the fund balances, or our reserves, gives us runway for bad times. And so we have done well. This chart clearly shows that we have been, making prudent financial decisions, and we have built up adequate reserves for bad times and to give us runway so that we don't have to make extreme cuts or layoffs when things go south. And so this chart is a positive story of where we are and the adequate reserves that we've built up over the past 10 years or so here. That gives us some runway. The next slide, again, this is showing our fund balance as a percentage of revenue. We are third to our comparable groups here, and slightly above average as fund balance as a percentage of revenues. The next slide, this was just, I had done some different financial projections. The first one, the green line, the green scenario, is what I showed a month ago in a finance committee. I added some worse scenarios. I guess when I did this a month ago, I had CPI 2% for all years. In the yellow and the blue scenario, now I've got CPI at 0% in 21, 0.5% in 22, and then 2% the last couple of years. I moved evidence-based funding down to 6.3 million from the 6.5 million. Mandated categoricals, I did reduce those by 25% in the projections in the yellow and in the blue, but in the green, I kept it flat. And then in the corporate personal property replacement taxes, I decreased those down to the 1.6 million I talked about earlier. And then in the blue scenario was the worst of the worst scenario. That's where I put in the pension cost shift. The normal cost is estimated at about 10% of our TRS salaries. And so that the normal cost in FY25 is 8 million, but it's based on salary. So each year it gets a little bit higher. But in this scenario, I did a 4-year phase in. So it went, 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%. There's really no one knows if and when a pension cost shift, how they would implement that and how quickly they would phase it in or how slowly all at once. There's no way to know how, but in this blue scenario, so Dave, you could go to the last slide. So I just described the 3 scenarios I did. The green scenario was the one that I did a month ago. The yellow scenario was my middle scenario. And then the blue scenario, obviously, that was the worst of the worst, included the pension cost shift. So that concludes my presentation. I think Dr. Moyer wanted to talk a little bit more about belt tightening.
Hello. So I think that we need to be cautious and measured about spending. But as Chris described, I'm not sure that we want to take a doomsday scenario approach right at this particular time. And the administration has been talking and planning for various different types of things that we can do to make sure that we are being very sensitive to the fact that we need to continue to gradually kind of move toward a situation where in a couple of years, we don't want to make all kinds of cuts all at once and have somehow or another that devastate our education programs and upset the community. But we also think that there are ways that we can do that if we have a comprehensive approach where we evaluate our priorities. We believe that we can definitely find ways to produce some cost savings, but we can do it in a way that will not significantly devastate the educational experience for our kids. And I think that we're starting to do some of that. So for example, if the board gave us some direction to push off capital purchases for the 4th grade furniture, we could certainly do that. It's not something that is going to, somehow or another have a major impact. However, those types of adjustments are not structural. They're one-time things that, buy you some time, but they don't create any kind of structural adjustment for your long-term budgeting, because as Chris explained, all of that is essentially in salaries. And so in order for us to make, and so we're looking at our learning and teaching budget and our professional learning budget. And if we supported a few targeted priorities around professional learning communities and personalized learning, we found a way to, cut back on travel and consultants and save about $100,000 to $150,000 so that we could ensure that that money was coming from title money and not operational funds. Any money that we would spend would not come out of operational funds. So I don't want anybody to think that we're not having some planning discussions, but I think what would be more helpful for us as an administration is if we got some targets from the board and we knew what the expectations of the board were, we would be able to hit any number you give us. But we would like to be able to plan comprehensively to try to make sure that we're not doing things that unnecessarily hamper the student experience if it can be avoided. And I'll just give you a couple examples from my personal experience, because I think people may not, based on the conversations we typically have about my philosophy about education or whatever else you want to throw in there. I don't know that a lot of people realize that in my previous two districts, I've actually balanced budgets. And in my first district, when Wisconsin passed Act 10, we cut $2.2 million out of our budget. And we were able to do that and still increase our technology expenditure by $750,000 to start to get some technology off the ground. If you take a look at it like that, you don't have to look at these resource allocation decisions as either or types of decisions. And and in my next district, when I got hired, the board was supposed to cut $1 million at the June board meeting, and they didn't. So I went from what would have been a $1.4 million budget deficit my first year as a superintendent to starting out with a $3.4 million budget deficit. And we balanced that budget in 2 years and still made many, many significant instructional improvements in the district. So I'm just trying to say that I don't want anybody to suggest that we're insensitive to the current climate that we're in. But I think that if we know where the board wants to be, that we can chart a path forward and be deliberate about what kinds of financial decisions we need to make, and do it in a way that doesn't devastate the educational experiences for the kids. And we have some other examples of things that we've been talking about. I think it's been my experience that it's a bad idea to start throwing hypothetical things around in front of the community until you know what the board expectations are and you can provide a rationale for what your decisions are and that type of thing. So I don't know that I want to mention a lot of specifics. I just want people to know that we are beginning to plan for the fact that some of that stuff might be necessary, but I don't think that people have to hit the panic button immediately for this next year's budget. I think that we can develop an approach that people will be satisfied with when we have specific information about revenue and when we know what the board's expectations are about targets and fund balance and things like that.
Nice.
I really don't have anything else except to say that this can be done, and I'm confident that it can be done in a way that is prudent for the needs of the community and the taxpayer and the long-term fiscal health of the district without having to cut programs or do things that would. There will be some impact. You can't do something without there being some impact. But I think we can minimize that if we have some time to be thoughtful about developing an approach.
Well, Dave, I appreciate, this is Karen, that you are, what you said, and the priority really is the educational experience. Because we've really tried to, and we have been able to increase the educational experience where we were stagnant for a long time. And, even when I came on the board, we were in a deficit we were cutting, and so we were able to do what you were saying. And so we put strategies together about, we need to ensure that the educational experience for our students is what the world is that they live in. And so I think that, you were articulating that. That's priority. And we, figure it out from there. But we can't go backwards, and we can't become stagnant again. So I appreciate just how you're thinking about it and how you've done it in the past.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Obviously, we take, we take things seriously, and I know that previous boards have been very good custodians of the taxpayer dollar. Chris has done a very good job. So, we're fortunate that hopefully we can weather this a little bit, and people should feel good about how they manage the budget for sure.
Well, and from the standpoint of, making sure that we're moving the district forward, and truly the educational experience for the kids, whether it be a physical classroom or a remote classroom, unfortunately right now.
Yeah, this is Chris. So I feel similar to what Karen expressed in terms of I think we're seeing the benefits right now of prudent fiscal management that's been taking place for a number of years, and a credit to some of our current board members and prior ones in the administration as well for putting us in that position. I think that's a fortunate position to be in for the moment. There are significant risks though, right? And Chris outlined several important ones related to the state fiscal position in particular that I think are going to require remaining vigilant on costs and on fund balance, frankly, going forward. And I think that's going to have to be incorporated into many decisions that we make in the district for several years now. I think one of my concerns, so I see, I definitely understand the points that you all are making on the district's revenue stability. And I think it's terrific in terms of school operations that the negative economic environment we're experiencing right now is not really going to flow through into the revenue outlook for a couple of years. But it flows to our taxpayers right now. And they're experiencing the largest deceleration of economic activity ever. And so, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around voting for increased taxes based on last year's CPI in an environment where many of our constituents are experiencing economic loss and hardship. And so I think what would make me more comfortable, rather than providing a number to you of expenses to cut, because that approach would assume that me and my board colleagues know what the right number is. And I think the right number should be whatever the bottom up derivation is of costs that we can pull back on without hurting the educational experience for the kids. And I would like to see the cost structure looked at from top to bottom with fresh eyes as part of this planning process.
Well, there's certainly things that we can do, Chris, and I'm willing to be flexible on how we approach things. I am sensitive to your concern, and we've talked about this, so I understand where you're coming from. The problem, the downside, I won't say the problem, the downside of that approach is as Chris explained, that sets us up for permanent long-term revenue loss, and that puts us in a position where we may have to, down the road, make cuts that go deeper into experiences that actually do affect the classroom experience much more directly. So I understand what you're saying. I think that's the balancing act that everybody's trying to sort out.
Yeah, and I think what we should do is go through the budget together and look for opportunities to reduce costs without hurting the classroom. And I think that we can do that. I'm not confident that the board would be able to throw out a number that would be appropriate. Like what if we threw out $50 when it should be 75? Or what if we threw out 50 when only 25 is possible, right? So I think that needs to be a bottom-up discussion, not a top-down.
If the finance committee or the board as a whole wants us to approach it that way, I'm happy to do that. I mean, we have plenty of ideas on things that we can do that we think actually the budget adjustment some of these budget adjustments that we might make actually have some positive impact on our ability to program and serve students. So I'm willing to do it that way. I guess the thought about doing it the other way was just trying to make sure that we understood what if the revenue comes in, how far into fund balance is the board willing to go and things like that. So there's a little bit of a two-way conversation there, but we can certainly start by bringing some ideas to the board. The downside of doing it that way, there's another downside of doing that way that isn't necessarily, I don't want to say a downside, but when you start putting that stuff out in the public, then every person is sensitive to what they value. And then they start looking at it through a personal lens and not necessarily a systematic collective lens. And then a lot of pressure comes, and sometimes people back down and don't always make the best decisions when that's the way the ground rules are sort of set up. So I would be prepared for that if we start doing some of these kinds of things. If people start seeing things and it's something that's personal to them, they're not going to care about all the other aspects of the organization.
Yeah, I get the piece that I struggle with that approach, right? Because it reminds me of the EPERT process, and the way that, well, whatever, just past history. We were stagnant we were spending a lot of money as a district, but we weren't moving the district forward. And so the big piece for me is, how do we ensure that we continue that process? Because we do always spend a significant amount of money. And with that taxpayer money, I want to ensure that we can give the taxpayer the return on their investment from the kids' educational experience. And that's where that's going to be a hard conversation. With that approach is all I struggle with. How do we make sure, what are our priorities? What are we doing? Like the whole technology piece, right? I mean, if we would not have risked implementing technology, we would not be able to do e-learning. So I'm just really, I really want us to take an approach that is focused on how do we continue to move the district forward, given the money that we get from the taxpayers. Do you see what I'm saying? And not lose that momentum and become stagnant again.
I can just tell you right now that I can think of several things we could do right now that could come with some significant cost savings, where the way we approach things would look different, but would not impact, would not have a measurable impact on student opportunities, instruction, and various different things. I feel comfortable that there are things we can do that could have a relatively significant impact. So I see what they are, and I don't see them as being things that are going to decimate any of the forward progress that people feel we've made in certain areas.
Yeah, and I guess just my last comment, and ultimately the way I came down on it was, if now, when we're in the biggest air pocket of economic activity ever, so if in this environment we're not going to do a comprehensive search to make sure we're being as efficient as we possibly can, and any organization can be more efficient, at all times, right? So there's going to be things that we find. And I don't want to hurt kids' educational experience either, because I think that's important long-term to property values and to our kids and our town as a whole. But if we're not going to do that comprehensive view now, what would it take?
Well, I guess the subtlety.
I'm not saying we can't do a comprehensive view.
Right. Go ahead.
I would love to do that. I would love to do that. Seriously, because I think by doing that, what you'll see is we will get efficiencies, but we will actually, it's not an either or proposition. We will get efficiencies and actually improve our service to kids. I'm almost 100% convinced that that's what would happen.
And given that the majority of the expense is the salary and benefit.
Correct.
Okay.
I think, frankly, and I hope we would never have to implement it, but I think the process, that planning process, is invaluable. One of the reasons I think our previous board was such good stewards of the taxpayers' dollar was because that the vast majority of them came on the board after serving on that committee that Karen served on, to look at a comprehensive budget review and where we could cut expenses, because after the 08 recession, we were forced to do that. I think it would be a great exercise to do it again. And it probably takes an approach of not only asking the administration, I think that's a good first step for what their ideas are, but then also perhaps taking a bottom-up view as well. I think it's a good exercise. It's a great education for board members, because I think it gives us all a greater understanding of the operations of the district. What if at our June meeting, and let me just throw some numbers out, as Chris says, we don't know what those numbers are, and we know we probably don't have to implement them, if we ever do, for at least 2 or 3 years. So that gives us enough runway to have a thoughtful process. So what if we had a $1 million budget operating scenario where we cut $1 million out, a $2.5 million scenario, and a $5 million scenario, and asked for what ideas each of those scenarios would entail?
Well, I could give you I mean, we can do that. Again, if you do start putting those things out public and people start getting scared that things are, that people are looking to cut things, you're just going to have to realize that there's going to be a potential downside, to starting to do that. But I will tell you, I mean, if you start to get into 5 million, you will start to see things that people will, that's a lot different than $1 million or 2.5. Just, I mean,
right.
As
But
you
that's
know.
not even a 5% budget cut.
Yeah, but I understand that. But when all of our money's in people, you're going to start talk about class size and electives at the high school and all kinds of things that are just going to send people, off the reservation.
Then I guess what is our other alternative? To wait until it's a crisis and do it without much thought?
I'm with you. I can give you, I can give you those 3 scenarios. I mean, they're hypothetical, but we can give you those 3 scenarios if that's the way you want to start the conversation.
I think that's why
we have a little bit more time to involve more people, because right now, if we don't have to have this until a little bit later in the fall, it would help us, just because the task that we're currently going to consume all of our time is getting the next school year off the ground, and that's going to be a very, very extensive and time-consuming process for everybody. So I prefer that we could push that back a little bit till we get through that first hurdle of what the start of the school year looks like.
And what would your preferred time frame be then?
Well, because there are so many unknowns, I'm not exactly sure. You know, we're looking at 3 potential scenarios to start the school year with face-to-face, blended, or remote learning, and the possibility of having to, in any potential situation, switch from one to another with possible rolling closures or other things like that. It's hard for me to say. I could give it to you whenever you want it, but if we could do it, you know, school scheduled to start August 19th, if we could at least get that off the ground and make sure we're ready to go there, and then possibly do something in September, that might be a little bit easier, and also give me a chance to pull more people into the conversation to be able to articulate better for you why we, why we are coming forward with some of the ideas that we ultimately will.
Since this exercise is hypothetical, and I think we can't emphasize that enough so we don't get the community in an uproar, that in fact we're trying to be fiscally prudent and going through an exercise of contingency planning. I personally don't have a problem with the September timeframe. What do others think about that timeframe?
I'm okay with doing that because I think the most important near-term priority is getting these schools up and running when we're able to do so and doing it effectively. So I agree with that. But I want a commitment from you all that in everything we're doing, we're going to be extremely respectful of our taxpayer, because this economic environment is severe for many of our constituents. And, you know, if we delay contingency planning, fine. And I know we don't have to implement a lot of cost reductions right now because we are in a great fiscal position, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make prudent actions that are common sense and that don't hurt the kids in the classroom. So when I hear that there are opportunities like that, those should happen, right, is my reaction. And I think taxpayers finding out that we're planning to try to, you know, continue a recent history of fiscal prudence, I mean, I think that's a good thing. And I'll take some heat for that if we need to, but, you know, we have to do it. But if we delay it, that doesn't mean, I think we should be in true maintenance capital spending mode. I think that, you know, some common sense things like travel, consultancy expenses, other things that aren't going to necessarily touch the kids, I want those done now, personally. And if we need to delay a larger discussion about, you know, much bigger numbers, fine. But I just want to make sure that we're being as respectful as we can of the economic hardship that our people are going through right now.
So maybe the answer is we have a hybrid. We do a deep dive in the fall, but for some of the lower hanging things like, you know, optional furniture purchases and travel, et cetera, do you think we can put together, you know, for our June meeting, what those lower hanging things would total up to?
Yeah, I think that's what we would do, because that's part of we're in the middle of that right now as part of the regular budget process. And I think we're far enough along. Chris, would you say I would say that's not a problem, right?
I don't think that's a problem. I am concerned the bigger project being September might be too soon to commit to with, I know, Dave, you have me on the planning committee related to busing, and there would be a lot of work needed. I mean, as Dave is concerned about the upcoming school year with operations, as we are in my department as well, September might be tough for the bigger project, but the June, the low-hanging fruit part about putting something together for June, I think it's doable, but the bigger project being done by September would be tough.
How about then we talk about these lower hanging opportunities in June, and we discuss what a bigger, more comprehensive approach might be timing wise. We discussed the timing of that at the June meeting as well. And
even a month, Jim, helps us. I mean, we could get these planning committees off the ground. We could have a better idea what we're dealing with. We might have a little more information. So if you could give us some leeway on
in June, let's discuss that completion date. And let's also emphasize that this is a tremendous opportunity for board member education. And the more thoroughly a board understands the budget and all of the moving parts, the more effective board members they can be. So as you go through that exercise, I think involving the board is, whether we have to cut a dime, let's hope we never have to. But I think it's a great exercise in how do we more fiscally efficiently deliver better education to our community. And so let's just include the board along the way instead of just, let's just use as an opportunity to educate the board along the way instead of just having it be a final presentation to the board. The point I'm trying to make is that a deep dive understanding of the budget is very useful to a board member.
Yeah, I think that, we would explain an educational rationale for everything we put out there. And I think that it would be good for the board to understand why some of these changes actually, finances or no finances, actually are a good thing for the learning process.
All right, so we'll discuss the easier opportunities in June and the timing for a deeper dive in terms of when we plan to complete that process, what month in the fall.
Okay.
Anything else on this? We still have April financials. Turn it back to Chris Welton.
All right. In my presentation, I covered a lot. Anything really that I wanted to talk about on the April financials. So if there aren't any questions about the April financials, I just wanted to present them. And if anybody doesn't have any questions, I don't really need to talk about them.
What's the projected trough fund balance, Chris, for this year?
Fund balance?
The trough.
Usually look for the end of May fund balance.
Okay. Chris, or Dave, can you put up the April financial report for me? And then if you could go down to page 8 where we have the operating fund summary. Yes. Yeah, keep zooming in if you can. So this shows that in April, we are at 27.64. Our fund balance to annual expenditures it's at 27.64. Last year at the same point in April, we were at 27.97%. So we're right in line with where we were last year. And then last year when we got to May, it did get down, but all of the balances ended up being positive. So I expect the same this year. I'm expecting this year to come in pretty close. I mean, it all depends on the May and June property taxes. So it's hard for me to project, not knowing where the property taxes are going to be. We know that they'll be, less than past years because of the county waiving the penalty on those impacted by the COVID-19. So, but we're right on schedule here with last year.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I do think the April financial report is interesting, and just it does highlight what we touched on earlier about the positive work that has been done to build up the fiscal position that we have today. So thank you all for your contributions to that. It's definitely a valued resource in this environment.
Dave, if you could go to the next slide, the next page with this chart. This is my favorite chart. But you can, I know Karen, that's my favorite chart. But it shows the expenditures. The red line, the straight red line is slightly more than last year. That's the expenditure line, and then the black line is our revenues, which you can see that it's kind of right above last year. So I mean, it all comes down to these final months and property taxes to see where we're going to end up. But the dark green line is this year's fund balance compared to last year's fund balance. So it's this chart kind of tells the story of the fiscal year when you look at it.
So if I were to extrapolate into May, which is our low fund balance, to answer Chris Kaczynski's question, it looks like we end the end of May projected somewhere in the 32 million.
Right, slightly more than last year, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
So Chris, to your comment, I like this slide too. Thank you for putting it together all these years, because I like looking at the trend, and that's actually what I'm going to get into. Is our expenses have for quite a while outpaced our revenue, and your concern moving forward, and maybe not this upcoming year, but a couple years later,
right,
your concern is that acceleration rate. But if we keep looking at this trend, we should be able to see that happening, and at what rate. I mean, I'd like us to talk about it, but at the same time, this shows you that.
Yeah. I mean, the expenditure side is all about the staffing. So it's all about, how many we hire each year, and we've been averaging 11 teachers per year. And then the other thing that's a big factor is the benefit increases. So you got the number of teachers we hire. We do always get some savings out of retirements, which helps. But then, your health insurance renewal is a big factor. I know that we've had some employees whose spouses have lost their insurance or lost their jobs and come on to ours. That's been happening recently.
As in the last couple months, you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so I'm always concerned about staffing, salaries, and benefits on the red line expenditure part of this. And like you were saying, is is that if in FY23 we get a very small increase, we get the no CPI scenario, the 0% CPI, and a new construction number that's small, that we only get 1% out of new construction, then you're looking at a 1% revenue increase. And how do we keep that red line from going up? And I was talking to Chris this week about just that our enrollment keeps going up. The needs of our students in EL and special ed keep going up. We keep hiring more and more EL and special ed, and our enrollment keeps going up. It's hard to not have an increase from one year to the next. When your enrollment keeps going up, your special ed and EL needs keep increasing. How do you keep your staffing, from going up? That's really the thing that I'm always focused on, staffing, and that's the biggest part of this budget.
Well, and so that's why I was, articulating the difficulty for me is how can we reinvent how we do education, right? Because that's what we're going to have to do. Just like I remember in my corporate days, that's exactly what you did. And so those are the sorts of conversations, because we can't just say we have to cut because we don't have the money, but we have to reinvent how do we do what we do and do it better with what we have. I mean, I guess that's the real conversation that I'd like to have and hear. And unfortunately, Dave had to get ready for tomorrow's call. But I mean, so, you and, as you talk in your cabinet meetings with your learning and teaching peers, right? That's really what we're asking them for as a board. That's what we've been doing for the last 9 years that I've been on the board. We've been able to accomplish that. But we've pushed it. Mm-hmm. And we're going to need to have the, cabinet level people understand what we were trying to do as a board on behalf of the community. And that would get to Chris Kaczynski's points too. Because what traditionally has happened is this is just the way that we've done education for whatever, decades. It's unsustainable. We said that 9 years, and I'm going to harp on it. We've got to reinvent how we do it. Mm-hmm. Because you just can't do it the same way.
Yeah, I think Dave Moyer was pretty clear that he was looking forward to bringing some of those ideas to us this fall.
Yeah. Yeah. So one last question about the EAV, Chris. You're concerned that it's going to be virtually zero. One, because the economy, or what other factors?
You mean new construction?
I'm sorry. Yep, that's exactly right. New construction.
I didn't say that would be zero. I mean, the residential has been pretty consistent, and that really is what we depend on as far as the new construction is the residential. And just I guess if you went back to 2012, it was a lot smaller residential new construction. So I just think new construction is a lag. You probably still have people in Elmhurst doing construction projects around town this year. The question is, will they be doing it next year or the year after on residential? Okay. I have a feeling this year, that some of those projects were in the middle of, and they kept going, but will they continue to be able to do that next year or the year after? That's the bigger concern on residential new construction.
Gotcha. And that gets to Jim Collins. What you have said relatively recently is we cannot make decisions based on expecting that new construction to continue, because it just can't at the rate that it has.
Yeah, Karen, that's correct. Because if you look at our costs they have been going up faster than the rate of inflation. We are limited in increasing taxes to the rate of inflation. And it is new construction every year that has covered the differential between inflation and what our costs have gone up.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
Tim,
I mean, I'm sorry, Chris
go ahead.
Walton.
I was going to wrap up it, but you have another question. That's
I
fine.
do. Just this last point. It just reminded me of, I don't know how many, when we first started working together,
Mhm.
the importance of helping all of our employees understand a little bit more the impact financially. Do you know what I'm saying? To what they're doing and how they're thinking about doing their jobs. I just think that that's a key contributor. So, I remember us getting on the education bandwagon. We might have to do that again.
Right.
Okay, done.
All right. Thank you. So I have nothing further on the agenda, Jim.
Okay, does anyone have anything for Chris? Any updates for the committee? Hearing none, then we're adjourned. Thank you very much.